Hope your week is off to a great start. Today we are going to touch on one of the core topics that have caused me to pursue different ways of coaching and different ways of skill development. It's a problem that all coaches face at one time or another. So the question I received is, how do you maintain focus on technique when in the heart of the season and training is vital? So we know that skills matter and we know that fitness matters. But once you start training pretty hard, it becomes difficult to help swimmers stay focused on their skills. It's a challenge we all face in swimming when the technical demands and the physical demands are both really high. But it's actually reflective of a bigger problem, and that's the approach that we typically take to helping swimmers learn skills. We usually take one of two different approaches. First, we might use drills that are often performed slow and without any fatigue, and they're obviously very different than training, which makes it difficult for the skills that are learned during those drills to show up during training. The other approach is to tell swimmers how to swim and then try to remind them of those skills as they perform their training. The problem with this approach is when they're tired and they're expected to hit a time, what do you think they're going to be focused on? Their left elbow position or making the time and getting through the set? With that approach, things tend to fall apart once the training gets hard, and you'll often be asked questions, do you want me to do it right or do you want me to hit the time or something like that? And that's obviously really frustrating for coaches because the expectation is that you find a way to do both. But for swimmers, that can be difficult to do. So in a way, we're creating this skills versus training problem by using strategies that don't set us up for success. So the solution I like to use is pretty simple. However, it's not always easy to implement. I try to think about training skills. And so from day one, I'm working on skills, and then I'm trying to work on them in harder and harder situations over the course of a year and performing more and more difficult physical training. That way, I don't have to try to stay focused or not lose focus on technique because it's integrated into everything I do. So if you build skill work into your sets from day one and then simply make the sets harder and harder in line with your training program, you're not going to run into situations where you're trying to stay focused on skill development when training is really important because the skill development is part of your training, and so it's all woven in together. So here's a quick overview of what you need to do to try to make this work. The first thing is to identify the key skills that you want to improve. You have to be really selective. You only have so much time and so much energy, so you have to pick the important ones. Once you know what skills you want to develop, you just have to figure out how to train these skills. So you want to find drills and activities that you can use to develop these skills that can be trained hard, fast, and under fatigue. So if you have a strategy for improving a certain skill, but it's a drill that can't be performed fast or it can't be performed hard, it's probably not going to work for this purpose. And in much of the content I provide, I try to show you these strategies that you can use to develop certain skills in a way that can be done during training. So to make that a little bit more concrete, let's use a specific example. We all wish swimmers could hold more water and have a better pull. So option number one is to tell them what to do or use some pretty rudimentary drills. So you could tell them to wrap their arm around a barrel, you could have them perform some one-arm freestyle, and those might create change, but they're not going to work particularly well when it's time to start training. So if you take that approach, you're setting yourself up for failure because you're using a strategy that's not going to be conducive to harder training. Once things get tough, it's going to be difficult for swimmers to keep thinking about wrapping their arm around a barrel or whatever else you use to describe the concept, and it's going to be pretty tough to train one-arm freestyle hard. So if you take that approach, sooner than later, you're going to find yourself in trouble. Now, option number two is you could use stroke counts, different hand positions like closed fist or holding a paddle upside down, all those different variations. You can use resistance, you can use pull buoys, and then you can design sets that put their arm pulls under pressure. For instance, you could do 12-200 negative split, all at the same stroke count, and numbers 1, 5, and 9 are done with upside down paddles and a buoy. So they have to stay long, they have to find speed without increasing their stroke count, and when they have upside down paddles and a buoy, the only way they can do that is by executing great pulls. Or you could go 850s race effort. Odds are with a pull buoy, but they have to take the same stroke count, both 25s. They have to be efficient with their pull. Then the evens are swim. Another way to put a little bit of pressure on the upper body in the pull, work on that skill, but it's still training. And then lastly, they could go 20-25s. They're all with a parachute. The odds are minimized stroke count and time. The evens are just as fast as possible. And they have to do 6 of those repetitions with closed fists. So they're working on staying long, they're working on creating speed, and they have the closed fist efforts to remind them to pull effectively. Again, that's skill work, but it's also good training. And that's the case with all these examples. It's hard work and skill development at the same time, and they can't be successful unless they're working on the skills too. They're baked into the set. Now, of course, you have to work up to these sets from a skill perspective, just like you do a training perspective. You can't just do it from day one. They have to learn how to do these things. For instance, if they've never used stroke counts before, expecting them to be able to execute stroke counts in a hard set isn't realistic. But if you're integrating skills and fitness from day one, they're going to be building skills and fitness from day one. I go into this process a little bit more detail with more specifics in a webinar I did a while ago, and that'll be linked in the email accompanying this video. So for me, the best way to maintain focus on skill development during the hardest part of the season is to avoid that problem in the first place. And you can do that by creating a plan from the beginning of how you're going to integrate skills into your training so that you can train your skills throughout the entire year, and they're just part of the same process. So you won't find yourself having to try to remind swimmers of their skills when they're getting tired, because they have to execute those skills in order to successfully complete the sets that you're giving them. And when you do this, the problem disappears because there's no difference between training and skill development. It's all the same thing. You're just working on skills in more and more difficult situations, which is developing fitness along the way. Again, it's a pretty simple concept, but it's a really important one because it changes how you approach what you do. And as I said, once you get the hang of it, this problem tends to disappear because your skill work just becomes part of your training. Hope that was helpful. You have any questions, you have any follow-ups, let me know. Have a great week and keep it simple.